No, not that. I'm going off these electronic devices. They both say the same thing. It's 5 o'clock. So regular meeting of the Ojai Building Appeals Board will be called to order Monday, August 9, 2021 at 5 p.m. Could you take the roll, please?
Chair Ulrich.
Here.
Vice Chair Farmer. Here. Board Member Daddy.
Here.
Board Member Hanson. Here. Board Member Rollet is late, we believe, at this time.
Okay, that having been done successfully, I'd like to ask Tom to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Public communications. Is the time set aside during the Building Appeals Board meeting for members of the public to address the Building Appeals Board on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the board and will generally be referred to staff and or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under California state law, other than for emergency items, no action can be taken at this meeting. Do we have any public?
Yes, we do. We have Wayne Maynard.
Okay. Right, why don't, is that, is it to speak on a particular agenda item or just generally?
General.
In that case, have at it.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Wayne Maynard. I reside in the city of Ojai. I'm also here today for this item representing the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. And I just wanted to recognize and thank the city for their generous grant of the $50,000 to the council for supporting of our functions. We're in the process of a grant application to CAL FIRE, nearly a $3 million grant that we've done in coordination with some other fire safe councils in the county to try to move up our eligibility and hopefully success. Part of that grant application that we submitted to CAL FIRE includes a project for fire hardening, to do some planning work and training and things like that. So this grant that the city gave to the Fire Safe Council is going to improve the Fire Safe Council's ability to get grants in the future. It'll show that we have, support from our community in the projects and things that we're trying to get accomplished, which should help us in securing grants in the future. So I just wanted to once again recognize and thank the city for that grant they made to the Fire Safe Council.
Thank you. No one else? I have a couple of items, perhaps, and just have note, a board member Hanson cannot, has to depart at 6:30, so, or before?
No.
6:30 is good. Okay, so ideally, we will wind up the business on or about that time. In the event that we do not, just feel no equivocation about excusing yourself from that perspective. I'd also wonder about perhaps the City Council Liaison Report and the Planning Commission Report, unless you think that more appropriate for at the end of things versus at the beginning of things, because oftentimes seems like it's a footnote or rushed or whatever. So how would we go on that from the perspective of the Planning Commission and the City Council representatives here tonight?
You're in charge.
Well, in that case, then, would you please, is there a report? Comments?
Thank you. Steve Quillisi. I'm a planning commissioner. I think there's a great deal that your body and our body can do together in terms of fire hardening. You can deal with the structures, and we can deal with the land use, fuel maintenance, and all of that sort of thing. And I would look forward to arranging a meeting between the BAB and the Planning Commission for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Sticks.
I've never been, do I have to press something? Green? You can hear me? Well, I just want to say I'm so happy to be here, finally, to the BAB meeting, my first BAB meeting. And I really am grateful to all of you for the work that you have done and will continue to do. And so honored and thankful today to be here as you go over the the Ojai wildfire resiliency plan that Bob Roper has been instrumental in making, and Wayne's been working on it, I've been working on it, and Matt Levere has jumped in, and James has gone back and forth several times. So just really excited to move forward, and it's such an important step for our city in terms of our own safety, that we are on track. So thank you all for the work. And as Steve said, I'm really looking forward to working with all of you in collaboration to make this happen. So thank you.
Fabulous, thank you so much. The chair would like to make note of the arrival for completeness purposes of Board Member Rollet. So,
Greetings. Apologies for my tardiness.
and also, I also noted that Mr. Miley walked in. Do you have any comments that we're still in the public communications, or more or less, zone?
Thank you, I know.
Okay, fabulous.
Can I add one thing, Ben?
Yes, absolutely.
And I also really want to thank the Ojai Fire Safe Council, specifically Chris Stanch. So thank you so much, and really looking forward to working with you two and the shepherds and the grazing program, which is a really exciting aspect in terms of getting rid of the arundo. So thank you.
Very good.
Regarding Fire Safe Council?
Would you step up? We
That's right.
we
Well, the door, I'm gonna
embrace
kick it down. Anyhow,
whatever kind of comments we get.
Well, I'm Christopher Danch. I'm the Executive Director of the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council. And I just wanted to expand upon the comments that Mr. Maynard made, who's also obviously on our Board of Directors. And that is in what is contained in the CAL FIRE grant and some of the extensions of that. Now, we haven't got it yet, and we'll know within a month or so whether or not we have it. But the structural hardening component of that grant, it is county-wide, but we're focusing on more at-risk communities because it's a county-wide collaboration in filing the grant between the 4 fire safe councils in the county and the Resource Conservation District as lead agency. What we're doing is, if the grant is awarded, we will hire 3 liaisons who will help conduct structure ignition potential assessments, probably under the Fire Protection Association, National Fire Protection Association's guidelines and their training. And those will be dispersed throughout the county on a 3-year basis, including in our area here. We'll have the attention of this liaison to train and then through oral deliberation based do targeted assessments of high priority areas. Another important aspect of the grant is that we are standardizing the assessments and standardizing the data collection and management and coding that's going to come out of these assessments countywide over 3 years. And that can be used for a number of purposes, including funding, but also we have 2 catastrophic carriers that are interested in working with us on that to look at using the Ojai Valley as a risk modeling experiment to see how they could change their wildfire risk modeling. So they've expressed interest in doing that if the grant is awarded. They'll contribute not only time and expertise, but also, I think, some funding as well. So while a large portion of the grant goes to Ojai-specific projects that's not involved with structural hardening, there is a significant, as Wayne says, there's a significant structural hardening component that will be stretched over years, but produce something that has not yet been done. That is standardized assessments and data collection and management. Thank you.
Question.
Yes.
Since fire hardening is a smaller element or a smaller component, what is, by way of example, the components that make up the balance of?
Well, it's actually 6 projects under the grant, and one of them, the 2 Ojai-specific ones,
is a fine-scale risk mapping project in collaboration with the Ventura County Fire Protection District. In fact, they're putting on top of that $125,000 match to that, cash match to that. That is going to focus on our planning area for the Ojai Valley Fire Safe Council, which is roughly a slightly expanded area of the Ojai area plan under OVMAC. And that will, and will include a countywide component, hence the cash match, a countywide component of an Ember cast zoning mapping. But the fine-scale risk mapping has many data layers. It's a GIS application. There is some modeling involved. And also one of the outcomes is a public dashboard that you can tap onto through your phone, through your computer, or whatever, that will unleash these layers of information. So that program, the budget for that is about $490,000 plus the cash match from the Ventura County Fire Protection District, and that's a 2-year program. The second project is a transit vulnerability and evacuation assessment in the Ojai Valley. That'll be done primarily through contractors. That is about $290,000 for that. That's a 2-year program, and it will be done in collaboration with Ventura County Fire, County of Ventura, Ventura County OES, and Ventura County Transportation District, and others, of course, in the city of Ojai. And then the third, then the structure hardening is a very large component of the total grant, and that is the program I just described. The fourth program is working on the countywide CWPP, which this council did 10 years ago. It's due for an update. However, we're realizing the unique nature of so many of our communities, such as the Ojai Valley. So part of the plan of the countywide is to coordinate the creation of local CWPPs. We do have a grant outstanding with the State Fire Assistant Grants Program.
Excuse me, for
Yes.
purposes of clarity and posterity, CWPP?
That's Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And what those, just for everybody's education, what those are is under the Forest Health Plan, Forest Restoration Plan. That's a Bush era thing. They created the concept of a CWPP, so there are elements to that, and ultimately they're approved by the appropriate bodies. So in our case, it'd be the county and the city of Ojai will actually approve and adopt those CWPPs. And they have traditional elements in them, and this council has taken upon itself to introduce new elements into it. But that grant will also be known in about a month, sometime in August or early September. In fact, the allocation from the city, if that grant is made, will be going towards the cash match for that particular grant for the local CWPP. And then another project is a wildfire summit. That's basically for us and the surrounding counties. And I'm not sure where the venue is going to be. It'll be held in the end of the third year of the CAL FIRE grant. And that is being coordinated through the Resource Conservation District. So we will have, that's calling in a lot of counties, including LA. So because there's a push to really try to do regional coordination in addition to county coordination, that's aimed at that goal of CAL FIRE. And that's the projects that are involved.
I have a question, but before I have the question, I have a comment. If you're going to have a meeting like that, go to Santa Barbara. The weather's so nice.
Well, yeah, I'm not. It's not up to me where it happens.
Of course
I just have
not.
my vote.
Where in this scenario is the fuel mitigation or abatement is being addressed?
Our main program right now is the Community Supported Grazing Program, which we launched in April. Our goals for the first year, well, we started in April, we have 1-year goals, and so far we've met or exceeded those goals. We had on June 25th, we had a stakeholder convening that about 60 people attended. I think the interest in support for this program is very high. We've already raised almost $100,000, and we haven't even started our fundraising yet. And that is ultimately looking to treat a whole corridor around the valley down toward Foster Park and Casita Springs. So that's thousands and thousands of acres. This year we did about 200 on our demonstration sites. We had about 800 animals on the ground for the summer. You might have seen them along the KFA land. That was our operation there. The fine scale risk mapping will also go toward mapping this corridor, and also it'll have a whole vegetation component for the valley. And that's fine scale. So that's down to, you push on the button, you push the cursor onto the creek below the inn, and it's all going to come up about what's happening down there. So that's going to allow us to go after funding and our partners to go after funding to take that on. The beauty of the grazing program, for example, which can be applied to vegetation like arundo, is that it brings in a whole range of diverse funding possibilities in wildfire safety, environment, watershed, education, agriculture, economic development. And so that is our major thrust right now to reduce the flashy fuels in our WUI corridor around the valley.
Chair.
And we've applied for funding for other things, other kinds of mechanical stuff that we've been doing for 2 decades in this valley. However, that particular source of funding, which has been one of the mainstays for our vegetation management program, state fire assistance grants, have become very difficult to get, right? When I came on board just 2.5 years ago, there were 30 fire safe councils in the state, right? There's now 250 of them, plus the RCDs, plus the counties, plus the cities, all going after this pool, which has shrunk by 3/4. So right now, 97% of applicants in the SFA program go hungry, regardless of the merit. So the chances of getting it are slim, really, So in some ways, there's a lot of money out there being ballyhooed about how much money is being put out by the state and stuff. The fact is, of that $1 billion, 3% is going to communities. So while the crumbs may be slightly larger, we're still fighting over the crumbs, okay? So we're looking at ways to do this in a different way than just grants. It's not going to cut it.
We had CAL FIRE here a little over 4 years ago, not quite 4.5 after the Thomas Fire. They had about 22 people, promised a phalanx of help and information and communication, none of which ever happened. They've promised us for 1.5 decades a new fire map, none of which ever happened. It appears the Fire Protection Program, who I believe is responsible for helping us somewhat of the arundo removal, is not happening. It appears that the only person that is stepping up, and I think it's from the wrong end of the horse, is the Taylor Ranch down there at the end of the creek. And this is going to be part of the solution that we're looking for the water adjudication. And that will take us 10 years or so. And in the meantime, we have an arundo situation, and I understand what you folks are doing because I was there the first meeting we ever had with Fire Safe Council. And when Will was able to get $550,000 to put in the last chance with Wally, we actually put in a corridor where we removed, so we actually had an area. Those types of projects done, those types of funds are done. We're not going to actually get funds where we can go ahead and put in a fuel break that actually will help one of our flanks from being overrun.
Well, what I'm saying is that the funds that this council has traditionally relied upon, that's principally the SFA funds, never got any CAL FIRE money. In all of Will's tenure for 20 years, never got any CAL FIRE money, despite applications to CAL FIRE. The main source of funding, I believe 90% I'm guessing at the exact number, has been the State Fire Assistance Grant administered through the California Fire Safe Council. That's the one that's become extremely competitive to get and less money. When I came on board, the grant that I inherited from the SFA went undersubscribed when Will applied in 2016. Undersubscribed. Now it's down 75%, and 97% of the applicants don't get anything, even though they need as much now.
So where do we look? Because we have so much fuel
Well, I think that where we look is that we have to, one, develop programs like the grazing program that brings in diverse sources and a lot of partners that can do stuff. So Arundo is like a tripartite thing, right? It could be the animals, mechanical, and unfortunately, chemical, right? And the animals can come back and keep it down. That's one thing, but that can be brought in through various things. For example, we just got a small grant from the State Waters Resources Control Board recognizing the grazing animals as a tool to be used in burn scars, okay? So we have to develop new sources of funding, but if this area, the city and the county of the Ojai Valley area, extending in the Ojai area plan, is serious about doing this, then you're right. Other ways of doing this has to happen, whether it is some sort of special allocations from the TOT increase, whether it's like I have presented to council the idea of a parcel tax, forming a community wildfire protection district to do that. I think that's something that like Marin did, a little differently than what they did, joint powers agreement through all the cities and everything. But that was very successful. It was overwhelmingly approved, and very, very small impact per homeowner and property owner. But that could raise money to do this kind of stuff you're talking about, Bob. It could do that.
Well,
But if we're going to rely on grants, we're not going to make it to the scale that we need, and that includes structural hardening. That is a huge undertaking to make it of the scale and consistency required to make a difference.
Chris.
And getting insurance companies involved. And I mean, I've managed to garner $300,000 of professional time from people informing our plan, right? But now we're looking for the money to implement the damn thing.
No, and I hear you loud and clear. And if we actually would like to keep this community, we're going to have to fund this thing ourselves, and we have to stop looking for everybody else. And I understand. And I would hope that you would get a hold of Laura and fully explain that Marin and the parcel. You know, I don't want people to say no to an idea they don't fully understand.
We're going to start a series of, for lack of a term, narrative videos on our site that really explain what we went through in a year-long planning process and how we got to where we are. And then to start to look at what these things entail, what they cost, what's the possible source of funding, and start to tell how we're going to do this. And, you know, part of the city's money is going to help support that effort. But you're right, people do not understand the magnitude of the problem and the scale required to adequately address it. And I think that's where something we have to have a hard look at.
Well, maybe we need to get some people from Greenville down here and from Paradise, and maybe they would be best to explain to the local residents what the consequences are.
Well, yes, and it's an agreed that, but for a change in wind direction, we could have preceded Paradise as the poster child for what can happen to a community in a wildland-urban interface. And so we have to consider that. And you know, but anyhow, we'll be giving regular updates. Please visit our site for updates as well. I'm presenting it at City Council tomorrow night. I plan to do that quarterly now on, and I, you know, move forward with the many partnerships that we have to form to make this happen. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Miley?
For the record, my name is Bill Miley. I've liked the GOAT program for a long time. And maybe you've already talked about this, but I think we should have an Adopt a GOAT program here. And where people contribute for a particular goat. And I would be very interested in being part of that, in addition to the organization, but also in funding it. I think that would be really fun to have. Thanks.
Thank you. Adopt a goat. Adopt a goat. Well, you know, figuratively. Well, okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay. In that case, then we'll move to the consent items, and we have one consent item, which is the minutes of the regular meeting of the Building Appeals Board of May 26, 2021. Recommendation approve as submitted. So,
I make a motion, we adopt.
yes.
I second it.
All right.
Ulrich,
Yes.
Farmer. And Farmer,
Yes.
Daddy,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Rolay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. In that case, I'll sign the darn thing. Okay. The discussion item, and we don't, nothing's changed as far as the report from the building official?
No, sir.
Okay, right. Okay, discussion item is review fire hardening improvement operations. And the recommendation is to provide a recommendation to City Council for additional fire hardening options. And we can start with a discussion, I think, because, well, here, I'll just read this thing first. And this is from our building official. Administrative report. At the March 24, 2021 Disaster Council meeting, the Disaster Council, which includes Mayor Betsy Sticks, Mayor Pro Tem Wyrick, the City Manager, Public Works Director, Police Chief, and the Fire Chief, as well as community members Bob Roper and Bob Daddy, recommended that the city continue to identify potential fire hardening options to help mitigate future fire risk. At the Disaster Council meeting, the City Manager stated that the city did adopt fire hardening items during building code adoption in February of 2019, including requiring Class A roofs, spark arresters on fireplace chimneys, heat sensors in the garage, and others. Members of the Disaster Council stated that although the city adopted a building code update that included fire hardening improvements at that time, there may be additional items that need review. Disaster Council recommended that the City Council review fire hardening options. The City Council has directed the Building Appeals Board again review and make recommendations for fire hardening improvement options in the city's building and code. The recommendations of the Building Appeals Board will be presented to Council at a future meeting. In Attachment A of the current amendments to the 2019 California Building and Residential Codes as adopted by the City of Ojai. And that is Ojai Municipal Code Section 9-1.301 amendments. That's Attachment A, page 1 of 6, and it goes on for the reference 6 pages. At this point, discussion?
Chair, for clarification, Tom, we went through this quite a while ago. Is part of a meeting, and I'm not sure which one I had with Chief Roper, there was a discussion that we're about to get a new fire map and a different fire map in planning. And this thing has evolved over the last dozen years or so. We've been doing this for quite a while with very little luck. I do recall, and I certainly wished he were here, but I do recall him saying that once a certain map was adopted, then 7A becomes our rule without adoption. And so 7A then will take precedence because of the fire zone. Can you elaborate on that, especially with this 7 section?
Well, the way we adopted the fire, the way we adopted the fire severity zones, we amended 7A, and we also amended Chapter R337 of the Residential Code, which is 7A of the Building Code in the Residential Code.
Right.
The way we amended it was, we took every severity zone, fire severity zone that is on a fire map and included it in those sections. So therefore, it doesn't matter at this point how the map changes. Even if it's mid-cycle, it doesn't matter because we've amended the code to cover all severity zones.
Okay.
So if the high fire severity zone increases, or the very high, because that's what it applies to technically, if the very high fire severity zone increases or decreases, it's a moot point when it comes to building code, because we still apply the very high fire severity zones throughout the entire city.
So the city has precedence and control within the city.
Correct.
As far as what they're building.
Next code cycle, we'll just have to re-adopt the same way.
Okay, so Chair, I'm going to make a recommendation that we come up with a list of items, at least for discussion. And I would kind of like Dale Hansen has an idea, and go around and we start taking a look at some things. Chief Roper made a couple of statements. One of those statements that surprised me was we need to stop attaching wood fences to the sides of houses, because when the wood fence and the gate goes, it takes the house. We have the rain gutters, and I had the mayor pro tem out in the middle of the street today, and we're looking at a rain gutter that has got 10 bushel baskets of leaves and things ready to go. I mean, we have a lot of things that we didn't do when we were recommending this that we need to do. We've got low-hanging limbs right over chimneys, fireplaces. I mean, we've got a lot of things that we need to look at. So
you're saying generate that list now?
I would say now, just as a talking point, so we can get some ideas out there of. I don't know if they're going to take this all, but ultimately we need to remove the stuff that's the Embercast is going to start spot fires all over the community, and there's some simple things we can do. And so I would say let's start with the easy ones, and then let's discuss what triggers those. Either a permit, as we have hundreds of permits a year. We've got a little over 200 home sales a year. We do that with the inspection for the lateral lines for the sewers, where we got, or I got them to put the camera in. I'll take the fault for that. But it's effective and it works. And so we can go ahead and start some of these things where the community's going to have notice, and the community's going to want input, and they're going to want to see what's going on. And I think the community will probably have some good ideas for us.
Are we gonna wanna set a dollar amount on the permits, or Bob?
Council will ultimately do that. We can make a recommendation. We don't get to set anything, but ours is just going to be. Yeah, I would think that when somebody spends $25,000 to put in a shower pan, then we could certainly put in those little 1/8-inch screens over the upper openings, apertures, where we have airflow go through the roof, where in fact that's where the fires are occurring these days. And we could put screens over the rain gutters or remove the rain gutters. They don't seem to be quite as necessary these days as they were in years gone by, Tom. We don't have any more gully wumpers. And so I think it's just time for us to come up with a list of these. One of the things I think we're going to have is we're going to have a real clash. You've been here long enough, I've been here long enough to see us have to have mounted sheriffs when it came to cutting a limb or a tree in the city, and we've had some pretty big crowds on those things. So removing limbs to a 10-foot clearance over a chimney is going to be pretty tough. And that's going to take a lot of input as to what's really necessary, not just get a measuring stick and just cut them off. So we had a gentleman from one of the mobile home parks where the insurance companies have come in and just decided, whack it, and this is what it's going to be or it's not going to be. So I really think that we should get a list, enumerate it, and start as quickly as we can.
Did Chief Roper have anything in writing, or was he just extemporizing?
No, he actually had a number of websites. And again, no, not yet. I've had some different meetings outside of the fire disaster, and then we do have a pretty long list from one of the insurance companies that just goes through the nuts and bolts, and it talks about all the different things that they're looking at. And it's pretty simple. They say, if you don't do these, we won't write insurance. That's so, they're pretty simple. It's a pretty cast iron. And we've reached the point where 25% of our residents in the valley are not getting renewed. And it's getting extremely difficult for people on new purchases to get any insurance outside of the state of California, or people got their rates doubled and tripled. And that's because we've had 4.5 years with no program in force, to mitigate these hazards and make them feel a little bit better.
Last fire, the last event.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I do have a list. And this pertains to new construction or any remodels of over like $1,000. Am I?
Your mic. Hold your mic up.
Oh, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So Bob mentioned most of them, but the screens on all rain gutters. You drive around town, you see the rain gutters are all flowing over with dead leaves. Clear all roof hangings, 10-foot minimum limb height above the roof. All spark arresters should be replaced. No wood attached to the home gates or any kind of fencing that attaches to the house. A 1/8 grid screen size on all of the vents along the roof line. That's where a lot of the embers fly through. And I checked with a local hardware store, and they have them in metal, 1/8 inch that you use, and it comes in strips, and it's very easy to apply. All plastic skylights must be replaced. We went over that in an earlier meeting. Prohibit combustible mulch and all surface wood chips. Unfortunately, those do help cool the ground, and it's good for our trees, but they do catch fire. All wood decks must be enclosed, no openings for embers. No exterior wood siding, shingles, or combustible products like hardy board, and none of those survived the Greenville fire. And the other thing, too, I was speaking with a fireman that works in the Siskiyou County fire, where they're having a lot of fires right now, and he said that everyone should have this. And of course, I only have one here to show you. And I think Bob ordered it, and it's a 3-way smoke detector. You put one in the attic, one in the garage, and one somewhere in the house, and they communicate. So if one goes off, they all go off. You might not hear one in the garage or in the attic, but you would hear that if all 3 of them went off together. They communicate with each other, and the set of 3 comes to like under $100. They can come with a 10-year battery, or you can get an electrical hookup. And those are the ones that I have so far. We could maybe add other things to it, but that's the list I have so far.
You made some reference to hardy side, just for clarity, that's non-combustible, so
Right.
that,
I think some of it is. I think some of it is combustible. You would probably know better than I, Bob.
It didn't survive in Paradise, and it didn't survive in Greenville.
in other words, it didn't prevent ignition, but did it, I mean, kind of, when something's left in a foundation in ash, it's kind of hard to tell what got ignited.
In an oven. I get it. When you go down Montgomery Street and you look at both sides of the street before, when you hit the powerhouse facility we have there,
Transformer field, you mean?
Transformer field on Montgomery now, and you look at both sides, we've got a half a dozen homes, maybe about 8 or 10, that have got nothing but redwood shingles on the entire exterior of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Sooner or later, we're going to have to start thinking about what we're going to do with those, because those things aren't treated. Or maybe you need to get some stipulation that whenever the house is sold or whenever there's a permit of a certain amount, that they have to be retreated with some fire retardant, because those things become dry and brittle. I mean, you know, the moisture content in those things are 0. The other thing is, when we do have a fire engulf it, we now know fires. I think we're pretty sure that we realize that the fires really draw their own wind, they draw their own environment, they really make their own little tornadic action, and they flip these things around like frisbees, on fire. So, we need to be really careful of the spread. We had that one house on Grand where the garage caught on fire, took out the house next door. So we've got rooftop to rooftop on Grand. I think a number of you have seen those pictures of the house where they're literally 12 inches apart. roof tip to roof tip is only 12 inches. That's not a very decent fire separation. And then I would ask, while we're coming up with this great wish list, and I would ask Tom a question. We put in Class A roofs, and that's what we need to do. We had Class C roofs in Ojai. One of the things we never did, and I've tried for 10 years, we never did what Pasadena did, was put in a sunset that after a certain point in time, when we realized they're so dangerous, that we never put in a sunset period that said, look, you sell your house or you have to re-roof, it's fine, you can do that. But after a certain point in time, it's really going to be time to remove these things. I hope we would do that. And then the other thing that I would be concerned with, and I know that got the cart way before the horse, is on these tiny movable homes with wheels. Are they going to come under the same rules as a Class A roof because they're in fact DMV kind of guided? And what can we do if the council wants to put in a stipulation that those things are going to have Class A roofs if they're going to be used as a living quarter, not as an RV. I understand that doesn't qualify. But if they're going to be used as a living quarter, what would we need to do to affect a Class A roof on those things? So that's a thought.
Well, that's a tricky one because the answer, because those are on our trailers, they don't fall under Title 24, which is what our building code falls under. They would fall under a mobile home, which is Title 25. And so then HCD would have, the State Housing and Community Development Department actually has jurisdiction over it. So the building departments don't issue permits for actual structures of mobile homes because they are produced to different standards. So that it might be a little bit more tricky. You can't say that it can't be done. It might be a cooperation between the state and the city, but it would be something to maybe recommend to council to direct staff to look into if that's something that you guys want to recommend to council. And as far as the sunset clause, again, recommend it to council, and we can see where that goes.
Tom, where are our limits on geography, topography, and climate as far as having the city having the ability to go above the state minimums? We can't go below, but we can always go above. So where's the red line that says, okay, you can't even really go above the above, or is there? Or can this city just condition this because it says we're in an ultra-high urban wild interface where we lack sufficient separation of fire divisions? And when you take one of those things, again, the Class C roofs we had withstood an ember the weight of 2 nickels for 10 minutes before it combusted, where a Class A will withstand 2 full weights of 2 red clay fire bricks for 2 hours. We're going to need all the time we have if we get a fire in here to be able to have fire defense lines, separation, and we're going to have defensible space. And if we go around throwing a whole bunch of places where we're going to have bonfires in the backyard, we're going to end up like a couple of these other communities, I'm afraid.
I'm not saying that it can't be done or that it's already not written into Title 25. It's not something that I am brought up on. Like, I'm not, I don't study Title 25 because I don't enforce it. It might be already that they require Class A roofs. I don't know. I don't have that answer for
Well,
you.
I would imagine, I would gainsay that you're talking about a stipulation. You don't have to justify it under Title 24 or Title 25 if it's something that's deemed important, like you indicated. The city, in order to issue a permit for a tiny home to be situated on a property, can have as a stipulation that movable structure shall have, for fire purposes, a Class A or equal roof. That could be a stipulation. I mean, I don't know whether it could be challenged on the basis of the various titles, but the issue obviously is you don't need to justify a stipulation that that we would recommend to council and council would find to be justifiable. So, from my perspective, anyone have a different perspective on that?
Yeah, wouldn't a tiny home be considered a manufactured home since it's actually built outside of the site? And there really is no license plate on it, I don't believe, even though it's on wheels. Once it's attached to the foundation, it would seem like it would become considered a manufactured home. Then it would.
So it still falls under Title 25.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's built off-site and brought in, it's considered manufactured, so it's built in a controlled environment off-site. Then it falls under, it's enforced by Title 25.
Okay.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, I know council has the final decision, but it seems that if it's going to be put on city property, that we could have stipulations about, I mean, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Anyone else? Anything else? I'd like to make an observation, and then I have a kind of a question attached to it. In my brief review of the history of this community, it has been threatened with existential destruction for fires since 100 years ago, within the last 100 years. And none of those events, which always seems to occur with to a certain extent after survival of a disaster or such a significant threat, is you would think that there would be a sense of energy behind a movement to do something in response to that existential threat. But these fires, and two of them have been within the last 35 years. The city, the community, has really not developed an impetus to protect itself. And the notion that we can generate a list of recommendations to council, and then council obviously has to look at it with an entire raft of considerations, and then adopt any or some or all of those recommendations, begs the question of how long it's going to take to actually have an effect that would fundamentally harden the community. And the notion that, well, you can make some requirements due on sale and transfer. You can make the requirements upon the application for a building permit of a certain dollar value. Is only going to have an effect on a certain percentage of the community each year. And I'm just going over it in my head. I'm thinking you're going to have perhaps at 200 units a year transfer, and at perhaps something between Tom, how many building permits does a city generate? And I'm not talking about for like a water heater. I'm talking about something that's, say, $2,500 value per year.
I would say probably around 200 maybe.
Okay.
Probably less than that.
All right, so you got something between 100 and 200 building permits, and you got a couple hundred transfers, so maybe you got,
7 years.
well, I was gonna say that's 350 a year, perhaps. Oh, and once again, that's predicated on that recommendation being adopted by the council. 7 years. Okay, so that's 7 years of exposure, and there's gonna be a certain percentage, the folks aren't gonna be, the owners aren't gonna be pulling a permit, and they aren't gonna be transferring. So they're gonna stay unless there's an issue as far as fire insurance, or they have their own impetus relative to fire hardening of their own property. So whatever is recommended here, ultimately, and whatever is adopted ultimately by council, is going to take years to implement effectively on enough of the community to render it hardened, because otherwise you've got patchwork. And most of what we're talking about here is going to cost some level of money, and we all know that there's an allergic reaction to the imposition by public agencies and certainly by city councils on property owners where they're mandated to spend money, even on a transfer. So that conjures up, from my perspective, the notion of courage and political will, on top of, as I earlier referenced, 100 years of history without that political will, without that courage, and without, as from the community's perspective, a feeling of significant impetus. And I think oftentimes when we're made aware of communities like that experience a level of devastation, like Paradise and Greenville, it's like, well, at least it wasn't here. And we have something to feel grateful for, and we should. But that is also not impetus to go, what can we do to prevent it? It hasn't happened. At this particular point, we're looking at it, but once again, it's going to take, because all of this costs money, and it's going to take courage and political will on the part of council to adopt anything that we recommend. I think that's a...
Can I just say something, though?
Yes.
Most of these things don't cost a lot of money. They cost money, and you have to hire someone to do many of them, which cost more money. But most of them are really not great expenses. And we're not asking for point of sale. Maybe we should on some of these. But at any rate, they're doable. But I agree with you so much that this community, I talked to a lot of people about fire safety, and it doesn't go anywhere. They don't see the urgency.
I think it is a matter of awareness. I think the community largely is unaware that Bob, what are the key items that would cause a insurance policy to be canceled in terms of fire safety? Is it brush too close to the house?
Well, it's what happened before. We've done nothing to mitigate the fire hazard for that fuel that didn't burn. We are slowly upgrading our water system and getting adequacy in all of the hydrants, and we're putting some adequate. I mean, when you have a 4-inch wharf pipe, those little yellow pipes you see on the right, that's a joke. That's not a hydrant.
So is that an item that would cause my insurance to be canceled? Or
Oh,
not
of course,
renewed?
not adequate fire supply, certainly.
And what else?
Well, proximity in fuel, what they do routinely, and we do it routinely, is and which is really insidious. We buy chlorophyll maps, and Ojai isn't anywhere near as green as it was 20 years ago. We have stressed trees. You drive anywhere in this town, you see dead and dying trees everywhere. And one of the recommendations that I hope we make is that while Southern Cal Edison is still here to trim the trees, takes a look at anything that's hazardous within the wire line, the power line. We've got tons and tons and tons of dead limbs that are going to go that give us an exposure to an internal spark. And so, we need maybe just as important as everything else, is we need a group of people that can literally go street to street and write down every single tree and turn it in the city and have the city ask SCE to remove it. The city doesn't have the money. SCE has a limited amount of money because no matter what they spend, they're going to go to the public utility company and get reimbursed. Although it will be all of Southern California that's happening to trim our trees, not
I just wonder
us.
if there's, a self-preservation, aspect to this. I mean, if I knew that I was going to lose my insurance, I was going to lose my home, that having brush too close to the house or a wooden gate touching my house was a fire hazard, I'd probably go out and address those issues, and I'd fix them on my own. And I think if more people were aware, maybe it's just awareness. Like, hey, did you know when I moved next door, I came from the East Coast. We didn't have these fire issues. But intuitively, I knew that it wasn't good to have these pepper trees hanging over my house and all these dead leaves on my asphalt roof. One of the first things I did was switch out the asphalt roof, put ceramic tile, and I started cutting the branches. 2 years or 3 years or so later, it was mandated by my insurance company that I mitigate, that I remove, all of the flammable brush and material, the fuel. I didn't know. I kind of intuitively had an idea. My neighbor was completely unaware because she came out, kind of yelling at me for trimming these bushes. And I was explaining to her, I don't want a fire hazard. I think if more people knew that, hey, the wooden post, hey, the branches, hey, the leaves, hey, and then maybe there's some sort of certification. This is just one of these crazy, maybe I'm fire safety hardened, and you got a little thing you put out, like I have an alarm system. Hey, I'm fire
insurance
safety
is insurance is going that way, and they're looking. Since Mr. Danch is here, probably about 15 years ago, Will Castagna took Fire Safe Council out. We have 22 distinct neighborhoods. And we got that from our forestation map. And we've adopted that kind of as a neighborhood map. And they went out to every community, every one of those neighborhoods, and they talked to people, and they talked to them about fire mitigation, defensible space, clearance, a number of things to do. It's probably time to have, I don't know that that's our job, we're Title IX, but it's probably time to get some type of brochure, which is a hazard brochure, and just let people know that, hey, these are issues. Some of the things we can condition, that they have to remove when they buy the home, sell the home. That's good. But there's other things. Again, I'm looking at the house on the corner of Signal and Matilaha. There is zero clearance to the roof, and it's got 500 pounds of leaves, and all the rain gutters are overflowing, and it's in the middle of summer, and it's just like, I think awareness, I hope we wouldn't have to get into a strict code enforcement for every single house and knock on the door. But I think it's an awareness issue where we can communicate with people and let them know that, hey, we need to do some things. Maybe
And we might
could,
be, sorry for interrupting, we might be surprised with how many people voluntarily step up and, make these changes
Right.
to save their own homes or their neighbors' homes or the community. This day and age, maybe it's the community Facebook page, maybe it's the local newspaper, maybe it's an organized.
Well, I heard somebody
message.
talk about somebody from Paradise coming down here. We have had town hall meetings before, and this might be a good time to get everybody together, have a town hall meeting and talk about what can be done and what can't be done and this and that.
Bring Smokey the Bear.
Yeah, bring Smokey the
Well,
Bear there, sure.
the other thing that
Bob will
could be
dress up
done
as
is,
Smokey.
is Tom's been in this community for a long time. There are a lot of people, we have a lot of realtors, and they know about homes and inspections and what's going on, and they know the neighborhoods, and they know the fires we've had. And let's face it, the only reason we're incorporated as a city 100 years ago was why? We had a fire that went into the arcade and they didn't know how to put it out and they didn't have a fire department. Talk about awareness. How do you have a town with no fire department, right? So we had nothing 100 years ago, and that's why they incorporated. But, then it went across the street and it took out Libby's Hotel. It came down to Matilaha in 48 and 85. We had some big problems. We had the one up on Nordhoff Ridge. We are constantly threatened, and I think maybe we just don't have something which is a best practices. And I think maybe we could do, not me, but we could have people do a series of videos, council people, mayor, Tom, city manager, do a series of just kind of nice discussions. We've got that TV station, and maybe we should use it. I see this guy doing the safety issues and other types of issues and health stuff on that channel. Maybe we should utilize it more.
I just want to say, Tom mentioned about having the people from Paradise here. I did a notary in my office recently for a woman from Paradise, and she had some kind of city job or something, and I said, did you know any of the people that were lost in that fire? It was a chilling remark. She said, I knew every one of them. And that put a chill down me to hear that, because we haven't had that experience here, and I hope we never do, but I think that might be a good idea.
How would you like to address the generation of the list of recommendations and then the affirmation as a recommendation to council? Do you have any thoughts on that? Okay, we'll address those as soon as I get a consensus.
Well, do you want us to vote on making this list available to city council, or how do you
Well,
want to do it? I mean,
is that complete, or is it?
it's
Okay,
never
that's
complete.
That's what I'm coming to. Is do we want to expand it?
What I know, Chief Roper has a list, and he has a list of some things that we don't have. And I don't think we need to do it tonight. We need to start somewhere, and this is the start. But I would definitely like to get I'd like to get our a couple of the people that we have a new fire chief or almost a new fire chief. Like to get some recommendations because they're in constant contact. I'd like to see Roper. We can come up with a few things. I'm sure Tom gets memos. We can come up with a consensus. It's not going to be unlimited. It's going to be a little bit smaller. I'd like to start with that 500,000 pounds of chipped 230 trees we've got down in Stewart Canyon waiting for the embers to start that thing going.
Okay, so perhaps what you're saying is we'll have another meeting, reconvene with our respective lists.
Yeah, let's ask some people. Let's ask the Land Conservancy. Let's ask Fire Safe Council. Let's ask our fire department. Let's ask Chief Roper to say, hey,
Then distill
send
that down.
us 10 items for best practices.
Okay.
For survival. And
Right.
I'll call Keith McBride. Keith McBride was a kid that interned in my office, later became the State Farm agent in Paradise. His home and his daughter's home's not built yet. That was November 8th of 18. They lost 18,000 residential structures, 23,000 total structures. And there are 700 of those 18,000 at this time, 2.5 months ago, that have been occupied. That means we'd have like 5 homes here in Ojai 2.5 years after a fire. That's not acceptable.
Well, that's part of the talking about awareness. Should be part of the conversation. In the event of a devastating, even if it only impacts 25 or 30% of the community, you have that many losses. Once folks get past the insurance settlements and what are we going to do and what can we do, the question is for a lot of people is whether they're going to rebuild, and the longer it takes, there's huge implications as far as property values during the pendency of that restoration, as well as some of the logistical aspects that involve the city. and would involve the county as well to a certain extent. And I'm looking at what we're trying to do here is to prevent that, because I don't think that's not a really winning kind of situation. There's homes up in Santa Barbara, I think something like almost 30% of the homes in the Painted Cave that were lost in the Painted Cave fire, and when was that, early 90s, that haven't been ever rebuilt. They can't be rebuilt because the county won't let them be rebuilt. They're too close to a riparian area, the soil's not competent, and it would cost a ridiculous amount for a foundation.
We have seismic issues they didn't know before it got cleared out.
Right.
I mean, if you look in Malibu, we're still 25% of the homes from that 92 Malibu fire just because they're not able to rebuild.
So
We'll find, and then what we would find here is, Tom, what do we have, about 850 lots that are designated flood within the city? And so now you're going to have 850 homes where they're not going to have adequacy on insurance to go ahead and raise it, the 4-foot base flood elevation. I mean, people don't understand what this on the scale, other than losing your spouse, children, parents to death, and divorce. Losing your home is right there. Boy, that's number 5. I had 140 families have claims. And
Yeah.
I still have, of the 14 that totally lost their homes, I have 1 that's living in that structure.
Yeah, the idea is to prevent it, not to experience it and see how it goes, and try to recover from it. So, yes,
Before we go off on that,
a motion.
no, yeah, on the motion, we didn't say a single thing about commercial structures. And it's high time that, we include commercial structures because, those things are going to be great big bad targets for us. They're older. They've been here for a long time. We don't build, I mean, geez, I'm watching them re-roof for the 3rd time last week, the Playhouse. And I'm thinking, I mean, we got some old structures here. So I
Ancient
think
commercial stock.
we need to take a look at that ancient stock and make sure we include best practices for those folks.
All right, and that may be a little bit more defined perhaps, but I think from a general approach perspective, we're not just speaking about residential going forward. That's residential and commercial, because obviously same combustibility, or maybe a different combustibility, and it could be less, but it also could be a lot worse. So, okay, do we have a motion then? Are we ready for a motion?
What is the motion?
Well,
I'm gonna make a motion that we identify a half a dozen resources, and we ask the resources to help us and submit some best practices so we can put them together. We can then have another meeting once we've gotten that in a couple of weeks, vet them, and then make a recommendation to the city council before the end of September at the very latest, so they can take, and we'll be in high fire season by that time. So, we'll see where we are, and I will. I'll call our underwriting department, and because we're having a series of daily meetings on the dozens of fires that we have, because we are losing quite a few people. The Dixie fire is the 2nd largest fire in California history ever now, and so we're just losing it like crazy. And
I second the motion.
okay. Roll call, please.
Is there a specific deliverable? The motion is to pool resources.
Reconvene a meeting where we can discuss and distill the information with the intention of generating a list of recommendations.
So we're not going to identify the resources or
No, I think at this point, we needed to start doing just some research.
Okay.
But also not take too long for another meeting. So the question is
Right.
going to be, do we want to request another meeting in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? What?
Well, I think sooner the better, actually.
Okay, but
2 weeks,
I don't think you're gonna get CAL FIRE to give us
Probably not.
information. You're not gonna get
probably not.
FIRE to give us
well, I wouldn't want to predicate anything on an agency where we've had a history of. I don't even know that you want to depend on that agency for the information you're talking about. I don't think our recommendations, especially if we were trying to keep them into something sort of concise, would require that. You have a lot of resources. There's a few resources that we have available.
We
as well.
have some resources because the county of Ventura took a pretty big pounding, and so what they did was they upgraded their codes. And it would be interesting to see what they did to upgrade the codes. I mean, forget the piers on the side of the slopes, which caught everybody by surprise, but they came in with a number of fire hardening areas, and they significantly changed their code.
You're saying the county? You
the county.
aware of that, Tom? What he's talking about? Okay, right, so in that case, everybody's got a little bit of research to do. Okay. All right, so did that answer your question?
It does.
I
yeah.
do believe before you have the motion, you have to take public comment.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to know that we're at least have some sort of consensus about a motion and understand what it is. So, Mr. Maynard.
Hi, thank you very much. Wayne Maynard, resident of Ojai. And I agree with a lot of the discussion I heard tonight on things that you need to be looking for. I suppose I've got a hand I'd like to give to your secretary. I just made one copy, but I think you can get distributed to the board members for later discussion. But I think what I would be encouraging the board to do is rather than develop our own standards, there's a lot of programs out there already for hardening. And I think it might be, more valuable for your time if you were to study some existing programs, look at the differences, look what might be appropriate for us, and look at adopting as a recommended practice for the city of Ojai a program that's already been developed.
I think that's what we're talking about in our in that sort of way.
Good.
Because obviously it's also going to have a little more gravitas if we can reference somebody else's program as a justification for what our recommendations are to council. It gives council a little more support and perhaps cover.
Correct. So if you look at the National Fire Protection Association, their standard, they include training and certification for inspectors, volunteer inspectors, to go out and look at hardening situations and make recommendations to the community. So, I mean, there's lots of things out there that I think.
Who was that, Wayne? I'm sorry, what'd you say, the National what?
National
The
Fire,
National Fire Protection Association,
NFPA.
NFPA. The next thing is I think you need to make sure you identify the scope of hardening, because it's kind of a generic term. And maybe this group wants to focus on structural hardening. But a lot of the hardening programs are evaluating the property and the defensible space and things that need to be included. So you need to kind of make sure everybody's kind of on the same page as to the scope of what our project is that we want to identify. I was interested in hearing your comments about, getting people to be aware of a fire problem and taking it and understanding that they're at risk. I've been in the fire protection business for over 40 years now, and it's a constant battle. People never think that they're going to be affected. It's not going to happen to me, okay? And so when you develop programs and you're looking for voluntary compliance through education, you're only going to get a very small portion of the community to actually participate, is my opinion. And so another thing that I think this group needs to look at is, regulatory options. How can we look at regulatory options to see enforcement of whatever standards we want to develop? Because like you said, I really don't think that if you harden just every 10th house, that you're going to really have an effective program in the community. Because when somebody's house that didn't get hardened catches on fire, it's going to be a huge ember storm for the guy that did harden it, and you're not hardening for an ember storm from a 2-story fully involved structure. Okay, so it's going to affect the person that hardened it. So it is a community-wide problem, and we have to figure out how to do that, and I think regulatory is kind of the way to go. One option, I think it's kind of low-hanging fruit, is under the Chapter 7 requirements that my understanding it applies to new buildings and building alterations, which means that it doesn't apply to the existing portion of the building you're altering. Is that how you apply it in the city? Okay. So if I go and add a 1-bedroom addition to my house, I have to enclose the eaves, double pane the windows for this bedroom that I added. But right next to it, my living room, everywhere else, totally unprotected. Okay? So maybe we look at a percentage of the contract or the permit value, and maybe you apply 25% of the permit value to retrofitting the existing portion of the house. Some formula that would be regulatory to try to increase the fire protection of the overall structure. I just looked up, did some research today, because I really haven't been following this hardening thing very close, but there's an Assembly Bill 3074. This was recently chaptered. Are you guys aware of that? It's okay. It's a new law in the state that the chapter name is Wildfire Risks, Defensible Space, and Ember-Resistant Zones. So the state, and it's got a 2 or 3 year process to develop regulations, and I haven't studied it yet, but there's a lot of things happening at the state and local levels that we need to be aware of and take into consideration when we make our decisions. And my time is up, so.
Mr. Maynard, I certainly hope you're here at the city council meeting in about 6 weeks when we unveil this, and you can say a couple of things. 'Cause we're Title IX, and so when it gets to be tinker toys and building components and getting rid of those plastic roofs and plastic, we can do a lot of that here. But I think I'm not sure if they want us to recommend code enforcement and abatement outside the structure. I don't see that in our purview. Although we can always say, hey, we think you should do it.
Well, yeah,
but
I heard
we would,
your,
but
your
we would.
Planning Commission guy say that that's kind of what he's interested in.
Well,
is landscape maintenance.
and we certainly need to do that, but we certainly would need a couple of citizens to explain the ramifications to council. So I hope when this thing dusts off, you're here for that. I do like the idea of coming up with a threshold that says, look, if you're going to do this, one of the biggest things we find is Italian cypress up against a house that has an open eave underneath, because we're going to lose that thing every day. We're not going to save any of those. So there are some things. I just don't think they're going to fall within our area. So we need some citizen help.
Fire hardening structures is, I don't know, fruitless is too much of an overstatement. But if the overstory and combustible fuels that go down canyons through the heart of the community aren't addressed at the same time. So we could make at least a percentage as a community, a percentage of the structures much more fire resistant. But once again, the amount of fuel that exists in this community is a great part of the problem, because that's going to be the first thing that's going to be involved.
I was involved with the Urban Wildland Interface Code Development that was done by the International Code Council. And to protect the community, it's a system approach. It's not just structure hardening, okay? You have structure hardening, you have defensible space, you have fuel modification, you have access to get the firefighters there, you have water supplies. It's a whole system-wide approach. And where you're lacking in one, like perhaps you can't get the fuel management, or defensible space, then you have to like harden your structure even more, okay? So it's like, it's a system-wide approach, and you just can't take one sliver and say, this is what's going to protect our community.
One of the things, if you have a resource that I would be extremely interested in, there's got to be a return of investment. So when, just for example, this is not a recommendation. If you have a permit, you're going to do a certain amount of upgrades, then you have to do a certain amount of retrofit. If you have any resource for which of those items, is it the dual pays, dual glazed windows? Which one of the retro items gives people the most safety for the model? If you have any information on something like that, that would really be appreciated.
Exactly. It's, you know, another thing that we should be looking at is incentive programs through the state and, you know, things that can be used to incentivize this.
Well, they also have SB 100, which allows people to retrofit, and they've got some grants, and it comes roofs, windows, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And so we need to allow people to say, hey, yep, you're going to have to pay for some of it, but here's where you can get some of it back. And again, it's the awareness. Thank you very much.
Okay. In that case, are we at a point where we can, oh, excuse me, Mr. Danich?
I didn't put my card in, so.
It's okay, it's all right, we're, yes, exactly. Excuse me?
I concur with what Mr. Maynard said about a systems approach. I will say that is in our planning with the Fire Safe Council, which we spent a year and about $100,000 on, is that holistic systems approach. Now, a lot of this early assessments we're trying to get funding for is to provide us the data that we need to make these proper, to implement these things and understand what's a priority, also give rise to how we're going to fund it. But for example, doing a systematic structure assessment in high priority neighborhoods and having that data in a usable form helps build capacity for large scale grants like FEMA, right? Those are difficult things to go after. They take a lot of work to do that, and you have to show your capacity to handle such a thing. It has to come from a city or something like this, can't come from a nonprofit. So I just wanted, but also the limits of education. So you are coming down to either some kind of regulatory enforcement, some kind of incentive, or some combination thereof. Incentive lies in many ways with the insurance industry to incentivize homeowners to do what they have to do, right? And that's something that in the groups that I've been involved with, that's an ongoing discussion, but it's just an ongoing discussion. It never goes anywhere. So it just goes on and on and on. But there are great limits to education can do, and you're going to have what Wayne says, and that is a handful. My anecdotal evidence of that is I live on North Fork Springs Road, so we're like poster child for living in the WUI. And when I built our house, I said, I'm in the WUI. I'm in a very high severity zone, and I better protect myself. And I'm not going to rely on the government to do this for me. I chose to live here. And that's the attitude I took when I did this 15 years ago. However, I first learned about the Fire Safe Council and the very thing that you talked about, and that is they came around about 6 years ago and did their neighborhood sessions. They did 25 neighborhoods. Will said it was the most intense thing he ever did. And they came with the Forest Service and the fire department, and they talked to all the homeowners, 24 of us, on North Fork Springs Road. And they spent about 3 hours with us. My wife and I walked away from that with the idea that in addition to the steps we've already taken, which includes design hardening of our home, we took extra steps, and our home sailed through 60-foot flames around it in the Thomas fire. Some luck, mostly planning and preparation. However, the thing we talked about is they talked about what homes would be deemed indefensible in that discussion. They were frank. Like, what homes are we going to bypass? The fire department told these people, we're not going to protect your structure. It's indefensible for the following reasons. Now, you would think that might motivate somebody to go out and do something. We made a list of those homes. There's 10 of them on our street. All 10 burned. The only ones who burned on North Fork. Now, so there's a limit about people paying attention and being incentivized to do this, right, on their own. So I just want to make sure that we really have to start moving toward a more hard political situation. I'm sorry.
Well, and having said that, though, if that wasn't persuasive, that kind of attention and frankness wasn't persuasive to folks out there on the edge of civilization, here in the community, how, I don't see that almost anything we do as a community, or the city council does, unless it's mandatory, isn't going to have an effect. Because, yeah, education and awareness, but it only goes so far. And the big, you're saying, what's an impetus? You would think that most folks would consider it to be an adequate impetus to lose their insurance.
There's also an element of, communication, because
I don't
during the
think
Thomas.
we don't have time.
Well, no,
At this point, it's been 4 years since the Thomas fire, and what? We're still talking about stuff that we were talking about 3 months before the Thomas fire, and and we were. The concept of communication and education, I absolutely support and embrace. The issue, however, starting with my remarks, and I think Bob said effectively the same thing, 4 existential threat fires in 100 years, and we're still, we got a fire department. Okay, we got a building code that we've enhanced slightly.
During the Thomas fire, I can say from personal experience that we could have mobilized an army of thousands at that time. And I agree with you. At that time, we were on fire. We were surrounded by fire. Everyone was removing brush, pulling stuff away from their house, preparing their hoses, getting ready to volunteering. Myself, my family, and many of us included. I think the challenge is replacing that sort of motivation, when the fire is not, breathing down our necks at a time when we're all, living in luxury and everything's fine. But I still think that if we communicate, if there's a checklist and we can communicate effectively to people that, hey, you are at risk. There's every day you turn on the television, there's another town burning down. It's not as if we're unaware and completely oblivious. I think it's a function of, organizing this list, this just sort of checklist of things everyone can do at home. It won't necessarily send you into the poorhouse. You can do this at home. It won't cost you a fortune, and you can dramatically increase your potential of, surviving or mitigating the hazard of a fire for not just yourself, but for your neighbor. And I'm not saying that's the cure-all. I'm not saying we can go out and all of a sudden just drum up all this awareness and solve the problem. I agree we have to move now. But I think there's absolutely an element of awareness. A lot of people are just unaware that, hey, really? My gutter full of leaves is a major problem? It's not a big deal to remove that.
No, I agree.
Okay. Do we, oh, yes? Oh, is that your, okay. No, Mayor?
Well, thank you, and I know we can do this, and I agree with you, Reno, awareness and education. So part of the plan that ideally the city council will approve tomorrow includes public workshops that will begin immediately at the Boyd Center. And I am imploring all of you to help with that communication, publicity, showing up. Tell your neighbors to come, and we'll have, we'll make it a community event, and there'll be several of them. So that, and we'd like to start, assuming that it goes through council tomorrow night, immediately. So stay tuned.
And Mayor, one of the things I think may be effective, Zoom, who knew, nothing came good out of COVID, but some things came tolerable. At the community center, if we can get enough people to go, we can have a number of people. I mean, we can have somebody with their cell phone on the fire line saying, this is what we're looking at in Greenville tonight. I mean, literally full-time, real-time from these communities, and we can have other people in these communities. I mean, we can get the mayor of Greenville on.
Great.
a Zoom meeting for us, so people can really understand that this isn't fake news, it's not washed, it's not whatever, but we can get real people to talk about real things.
And also, I totally agree, and to reinforce that it's not that hard and it's not that expensive and that we're all doing it, so let's do it.
Yeah. And in today's LA Times, we still have 50,000 people living in the hinterland out of the Paradise area that are kind of camped out, shuffling from place to place, roofless. And so that's a tragedy.
Okay, we have a Bill Miley, but we're reaching the point where Dale has to leave. So that means we have when we have a resolution we vote on, she's not going to be voting on it.
That's fine.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Shall I read my, what do you call it? Vote?
Proxy, I don't think it'll be necessary.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, great. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bill?
Bill Miley. I have a page here that I have a whole bunch of notes on, and it's from the California Emergency Office of Emergency Management. I'm sure you're aware of that, and it has to do with the bill that Governor Newsom recently signed for $536 million. Wildfire home hardening program. You probably know all that. Okay. I like to look at things in a systems approach too. So you probably know that in that bill, there are three things that are primary. One is to follow wildfire education. Two is to provide collaborative with local resources to perform home hardening defensible space. And three, which is to provide direct financial assistance to support home hardening for socially vulnerable folks and low and moderate income homeowners. Well, you know that 1,200 houses in Ojai are renters. So those are the landlords who own the houses, and I suspect a bunch of them don't even live here. So that's an issue, but we have money for that. And I didn't hear anybody talk about applying for the money. So I think that's really important. Bob talks about 22 neighborhoods. So if we do neighborhood organizing for fire hardening, that might work. The issue of, on that page, it talks about wildfire home retrofit guide, 10 low-cost retrofit lists you can get, and residential defensive space. All are printable objects that you can get off the website. So there's also an issue that happened in the Thomas fire. Renters who don't have renter's insurance, a lot of them lost everything. And I talked to John Trent, who's on the Planning Commission, but also State Farm regional consultant, about the state providing renter's insurance for people who can't afford it. It'd be great. It would save massive amounts of money. You don't have it, you lose everything, and where you go to government to get help. If you had insurance, you might be able to get back on your feet a little bit. So I think that's really important. I would like to see all the residents of Ojai, and including the people who live in the sphere of influence, receive something at their door on a regular basis about keeping things, getting things better, what you can do. All right, okay. But how about a web-based game for fire vulnerable communities that allow you to play the game as to how you can make your community more vulnerable, pile up the leaves, let the trees grow and such, but also how to harden them so the kids would get involved. It was like a Monopoly game. And produce a paper game that the city can do and pass around, and you can play it and have fun. And the last item is, I believe that if we had an active Adopt-A-Go program, and if all 30,000 people in the valley contributed $5, that'd be $150,000. That would take care of 150 acres. Okay, something like that. All right. But, make it $10, $300, whatever. But I think if we had a GOAT program, people would be really paying attention to the whole issue of fire, wildfire, and hardening. So, anyway, I'd like to see the city adopt a GOAT program and have it as part of the city logo. Oh, well, something like that. Anyway, okay.
And Bill, about that money, in '07, I got Schwarzenegger to adopt $150 for every parcel that was in the wildland fire area, 850,000 parcels. And that brought us in $1 billion a year because we were smoking through $1 billion a year back then with these huge wildfires. And it worked so good, we stopped it a half a dozen years later. So the grants dried up, Chris. That's part of the reason but I'm saying we self-taxed ourselves, so we provided a lot of extra money. And so we had extra money to do things, and that tax went away, unfortunately, so.
Okay, resolution, do we have it cogent enough to vote on?
I suggest we gather a number of, we get some resources, we take a look at the resources, we gather a number of best practices and programs that are in force that discuss fire hardening. We have a meeting, we go ahead and vet those and forward those to the city council for questions, modifications, or adoptions, and get this thing done, have our meeting no later than maybe the second week of September, so council will have a chance to at least have this on their last meeting in September where they can go ahead and take a look at the work.
Okay. All right. Is that clear enough? Sure? Yeah? Okay. In that case, a vote? Roll call?
Ulrich,
Yes.
Farmer,
Yes.
Daddy,
Yes.
Hanson is absent, and Rollet.
Yes.
Okay. In that case, excuse me? Yes, do we have anything else? In that case, I'm going to call this Building Appeals Board meeting adjourned at 6:36.